This is a Main Hustle Media podcast.
Hello and welcome to the show. My name is Jackie O and you're listening to Militantly Mixed.
Yo, this is Rashani from the Single Simulcast. And when I'm not making you laugh or making up parody songs, I'm kicking back, listening to Militantly Mixed.
I would like to acknowledge that the Militantly Mixed podcast is recorded on the traditional lands of the Chumash and the Tongva people, and I wish to pay my respects to the people of those nations, both past and present. Hey y'all, welcome to Militantly Mixed, the podcast about race and identity from the mixed race perspective. I am your host, Charmaine, aka Mixed Girl Maine, the busiest mixed race, bisexual, polyamorous, atheist, comic book nerd, cat mom podcaster, and now mask maker in this podcasting game. We are back from hiatus. As y'all know, I take a month off every 3 months for mental health to kind of decompress and disconnect a little bit from how much work goes into producing these shows and decompressing from all the stories that I receive over the course of those 3 months, because sometimes we deal with a lot of heavy stuff here on Militantly Mixed, as y'all know, and I need a place to put it, and it sometimes backs up on me. When my first hiatus of the year popped up in April, I decided not to take it because we had just started sheltering in place and things were so dramatic and it just didn't feel like a good time to unplug from the community. So we kept it going. And then the civil unrest started. The protests and the community organization started to come together in such a big way following the murders of George Floyd and Sean Reed and Breonna Taylor and Tony McDade. And it was just so much that we needed to be connected to our community in a time when we really should have been sheltering in place. We still needed touchstones to each other, and I wasn't ready to unplug again. I mean, emotionally, mentally, I probably needed the break, but emotionally and mentally, I could not unplug yet, and I decided to stick it out a little bit longer. But then it really started to back up on me. Not taking that break in April and how heavy everything was related to COVID and the civil unrest, it just really started backing up on me towards the end of June. And I decided to go ahead and take July off, which was a month earlier than I would have normally done a hiatus, but it was just time since I skipped previously. So I took July off, hoping it would be a time to rest and unplug and get my mental health a little bit calmer. Yeah, that didn't happen. I'm sure everybody's dealing with some form of this, but there has been some loss that I've learned about this month. Family members, extended family members, friends or friends that were as close as family. You know, they're so far oddly not COVID related for me, actually, but there, you know, there's been a few people that have lost recently and had to kind of process that. I experienced my first Zoom funeral this week, and that was such a strange way to say goodbye to somebody. It was a mixed bag of feeling grateful for the technology and also just how impersonal and detached it was. So there's been loss, and that's been what it is. And then additionally, just life has been extremely busy. I work during the day at a private school, and getting that place ready for the possibility that children were going to come back for school has been pretty stressful, even though I'm in the HR side. Well, because I'm in the HR side, it's been stressful because there's a lot to learn about what's going on related to COVID. And then there was all these hirings that we had to do to accommodate spreading the classes out, only to find out that we're probably going to stay remote anyway for a good portion of the first part of the fall. So it's just been heavy. Like, work has been so heavy. So it has been a stressful time. In addition to that, and unintentional, I ended up opening 2 businesses. Well, I guess rewind a little bit. So before I went on hiatus, I may have mentioned a few times that I had started making masks as sort of a coping mechanism for me to process what was happening with COVID. It's something that's actually really stressed me out, even though it hasn't directly touched my life. I wanted to be a participant in helping the community, but I didn't want to be on the front lines and put my family or my coworkers at risk because I made choices to go out. So I decided to stay in, and the best way that I felt that I could contribute was to utilize a small skill that I had, and I started making masks. I started making them mostly for donations. I had donated masks to a few organizations that I admire, and then a few people reached out to me and asked if I would donate to their organizations. There's been some friends or people that I know that were being touched by COVID that I knew needed masks that I sent them to as well. And then as pictures of the mask started to pop up, either from my posts or others, I started getting asked if people could buy my masks. And I decided to sell them, to use the money to buy more fabric for more masks, for more donations and things like that. And then it got to be pretty consuming. It was really hard to not take a bit of that money for my time because it was actually detracting from other things that I was doing financially. So I decided to start selling them for real because I was being asked so often, and it got hard to run it through emails and DMs and things like that. So I started a website, masksbymane, MANE.com. Most of my masks are culturally focused. There are some West African fabrics, some Japanese fabrics, some indigenous Native American fabrics. I have some geek stuff on there too, although that keeps being sold out pretty quickly. So I am trying to get more fabric in for there as well. And then randomly, I've had some requests from friends and family for specific things like sports teams and such. And so if I have any leftovers, I put those up as well. But I have quite a bit of variety. I'm going to get some more things up there soon. And that has turned into an actual proper business. I'm actually selling quite a bit of masks, and I did not expect that to happen. I just thought it would be this kind of side thing that I can do to make me feel like I was contributing to the fight to flatten this curve. And now it's actually a pretty consuming part of my daily life. So I ended up getting a logo and some cute envelopes and things like that. And now I have like a really professional looking product that I did not expect to be doing. That ended up giving me a lot of work during July. And then we ended up announcing the business that I have been working on for the better part of the last year that I've been kind of alluding to in the intros, but haven't been able to talk about. I can finally talk about it now. But what was holding up me being able to talk about it is, there was legal papers that needed to be signed and things that needed to be checked off before it was time to tell everybody. And because my business that I'm opening is out of state, there was a lot to learn and a lot of work to do to make this happen. And then the Rona hit and it gummed up the works a little bit. So we had to go back in and retool our plan to figure out how to keep this thing going and build this foundation until we're able to open a physical space. So now is the time that I can finally publicly talk about it. About 2 weeks ago, my business partner Byron and I announced that we are opening a comic book store called Gulf Coast Cosmos Comic Book Co. It is going to be in the 3rd Ward of Houston, and we shared a mission. We were both working on something like this separately from each other, and in a conversation, because we went to business school together, we were in the same program, we were talking to each other just in terms of like, this is what I'm working on, what are you working on? And we ended up having such a shared mission that we decided to not do it alone and actually partner up. And so what we're doing with Gulf Coast Cosmos is we're trying to expand the reach of the comic and gaming culture among minority communities. And we are putting ourselves in the 3rd Ward of Houston because, one, in terms of community, it's exactly the type of community that would reflect the mission that we have. And 2, my business partner lives in Houston. And he was actually participating in a program that was helping him build this business up in this community with a community buy-in, basically. The community wants this place, and he was building it. And I've partnered with him because my version of that same idea that I was trying to do here in California was easily 5 years away. This way, I could actually be doing this sooner rather than later and have a partner who has the same passion that I have for comics and seeing ourselves represented in them, also had a community support, a community buy-in where he is located. So you can check us out on Facebook. We are Gulf Coast Cosmos. So facebook.com/Gulf Coast Cosmos. We are now doing a t-shirt fundraiser to kind of help us with the finishing aspects of our e-commerce site, which will launch in August. In our e-commerce site, we will initially be offering independent comics, a lot of things that reflect brown and black people so that you can see yourself in books. And we'll have some toys and swag up there as well. But that's the beginning of the foundation until we are able to finalize our agreements with the distribution houses for the big manufacturers, Marvel, DC, Image, things like that. So we're starting with indies and then working our way into the majors within the next couple months. But our e-commerce store will launch in August. So the t-shirt fundraiser that we're doing right now is we're just trying to get a little bit of funds to help us finalize the last bits of the e-commerce site. And then we're going to launch a much bigger, more foundational fundraiser in October. And that will be to kind of help us with a little bit of the startup costs while we wait for some of these grants and things that we're applying for to come through. So it's a pretty big deal. It is a life-changing deal, and hopefully something that within the next 6 months to a year, I will find myself actually physically being able to do instead of having to work for other people, which has been a dream of mine forever. And I'm so, so, so excited to be finally able to tell people about this and to actually be doing this with a partner who shares my passion. So if you want to support, I know I have a very supportive community and you come through for me a lot, and it probably seems like I'm always asking for donations to some charity or some aspect of Militantly Mixed. In this case, this is another form of that. It's representation in spaces that we're not usually present in the world of comics. Gulf Coast is not going to be just a comic book store. It is actually, we are partnering with a few elementary schools in the Houston area for a literacy program through comics, reading through comics. We are also going to be having some STEAM-focused programming as well, which will allow us to pair various comic entities with different STEAM exercises so that people can actually build up their interest in mechanics and science and engineering and all kinds of things, robotics. It is, it's just something that I've always wanted to do and just didn't know that it was going to be possible until I had the right partner to do it with. So you'll hear more about it over the next few months because we are building up towards our physical open next year. But for now, it is going to start out as an e-commerce site and some YouTube programming and things like that so that you can actually see the work that we're doing with the literacy and STEAM programs. So I'm going to share some of those links on the show notes for y'all if y'all are interested in learning more about it. Also, if you are in that community, Third Ward of Houston, then hopefully I'll actually get to see you there one day. So that is all the things that I've been working on or doing during this so-called hiatus. And I am now, in coming back with the podcast, I'm going to have to figure out a little bit more balance to my life because if things were stressful before, they're definitely going to be stressful now that I'm running simultaneous businesses. To be fair, the mask thing will go away eventually. Right now, it being still pretty hot and heavy in the world of COVID and things like that, I'm going to keep that mission going for a while because it is also the way I'm processing my fear. Honestly, it's how I'm channeling my energy into making the mask. But it'll eventually go away because it'll have to, because I'll need to focus on the main business. Additionally, Gulf Coast will be able to roll in some of our productions. My partner, Byron, he actually is in video and multimedia production. I am doing the podcast production. So we are going to have a space that will allow us to do all of those things together. So we got a lot to do, but we're going to do it and it's going to be amazing. And I'm really excited about it. All right. Have I told you everything from July? I probably haven't, but that is where it is. I don't want this intro to go too long. But I do want to do some shout outs because it has been a month since I've been on and there's been some Patreon sponsors that have joined since the last time I made a announcement. I do want to shout out Macy and Katrina And I'm hoping I pronounce your name right, but if I don't, send me an email with the pronunciation key and I will correct it. Saida. And I just want to shout them out and thank them for contributing to the Patreon sponsorship, in addition to everybody who has been contributing all along. We've managed to stay above the breaking point for production this whole time, even as some people have had to put it on pause. Other new people have joined in, and I just want to thank the community so much for that, because without your support, I really am not able to keep this going, as much as I'll never stop trying. Your support, your financial support actually really, really is the difference between my ability to get an episode up and keep things going. There is growing costs now that I've been doing it for so long, and that the audience is getting bigger, that will only continue to grow as we grow. I have very, very high hopes for what this next year is going to look like. It looks like we have a lot of new listeners. The downloads have stayed high, even though we've been on hiatus for the last month. And we also get new participants in the social distancing hangout every week. So now's the time. In terms of our mixed race advocacy and making sure that we are taking care of our community, providing resources and or finding resources, linking people to resources for support, now seems to be the time more than ever before that things are going to be available to us. And I want to be a part of that story. I want to be a part of that work. So your contributions are the reason why I am able to keep that up, and I appreciate y'all so much. All right. I hope y'all have been doing good over this last month. I have actually still stayed in contact with a lot of folks. For the most part, I've been a part of every social distancing hangout, except for this most recent one last Sunday, the 26th of July, because I did take at least that weekend to shut off. Shout out to Lorelei, who stepped in to moderate the panel for me while I was out. Now to get to today's episode. Wow, I feel so out of practice. This month off has been kind of wild. My guest this week is Penelope. She's a longstanding member of the Militantly Mixed community. She's also a regular in the social distancing hangout. So I feel like we've gotten to know each other pretty decently over the last few months, especially with the participation in the hangouts. She's actually someone that I recorded with back in May, before everything started to go, before I ended up pausing the regular episodes to do more activism episodes during the month of June. And I had talked to her about it beforehand, and I told her what I was thinking, that I needed to pause and everything. And she also agreed that it seemed more like the time to focus on what was going on in the world. And she was willing to sit on her episode until we felt ready to come back to regular episodes. And then I went on my hiatus. When I started to edit her episode, and had I edited it back in May, this wouldn't have been the case, but I started to edit it for this week's episode, and the file ended up becoming corrupted while I was working on it, and I had to restore, and when I restored, it didn't come back. So I was really upset, and I reached out to her to let her know what was happening. I asked her if she'd be available and willing, and if she had the spoons, basically, to do it with me again, and she did, which was amazing, because it wasn't how she was expecting to do her Saturday, but she was willing and gully to come on and talk with me again. And honestly, I think we had a really good conversation today that I am and it's kind of strange. I'm sad that what we had before was corrupted and I couldn't use, but the conversation we had today was so good that I'm glad that I had the opportunity to have the conversation that I had with her today. So, I'm trying to find ways of being more positive, and I guess that's my attempt at being more positive. But I just want to say that I'm so grateful to Penelope for having the spoons to do that with me today, despite not knowing that this was going to happen, that we had such a good conversation. And I feel that every time we talk, we get a little bit closer. And I'm just really appreciative of her as a person and as a member of this community. So I do hope that y'all enjoy this episode as much as I do. And without further ado, please join me in welcoming our latest cousin to the Militantly Mixed family, Penelope. I was on hiatus. My guest this week is actually someone I recorded with before, I guess, all the civil unrest started. And so we were kind of putting a button on it while I was going through my Black Lives Matter episodes. And in coming back, it was the episode I wanted to start back after hiatus on. But then it got corrupted. I was partway through the edit and my computer had issues and I had to reformat my computer and bring it back, and I lost the files. So Penelope has been gracious enough to come back with me with very little warning that we were going to do this again. So I'm really appreciative to invite back Penelope. Welcome, Penelope.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming back. Why don't you introduce yourself to everybody and let everybody know who we are talking to?
Yes, I'm Penelope. My mother is Chinese American. My father is from Trinidad. He was born and raised there, and then he came to the States as an adult. And I guess that's all I could really say for my ethnic lineage.
Okay. So how did you grow up then?
I grew up on the East Coast, and I have two brothers. I'm the middle child. I'm the only daughter. And I grew up in a suburban area. It wasn't too diverse back then, but now it's much more diverse. There were hardly any mixed kids there. I don't think there are any mixed kids in my neighborhood. But in my school, there were about 3 or 4.
And was that a mostly white environment or mostly black, or how was it?
I would say mostly white. There were maybe like 40 or 50 black people in the entire school. I'd say maybe more than that. But the high school class was like 1,000 per grade. So it was a very large school.
Oh, wow. That's huge. So you're the middle child, grew up in almost entirely a white space with a little bit of blackness. No Chinese or other Asians
There were Chinese people there. One of my mom's friends was half white, half Chinese. And she, her mother was a military bride. I don't know if or war bride or whatever like that's called. And then she was married to a Taiwanese guy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, war bride. Yep. So she was married to a Taiwanese guy, and then they had 2 daughters. And then there was a Chinese girl in my high school, but Asians tended to stay away from me. They are very much into being more white.
So that's actually a whole part of Asian life that here in the States that we probably need to address a lot more than we do. You told me, so just for a little background as to why I know you better than some of my other guests, is that you and I have been in contact for a while, and you also come to the social distancing hangout. So this is not like the first time we're talking or even the second time we're talking. So I know a little bit more about you than I do some of my other guests. And you do talk about how you are sort of coded more as Black, or maybe at least ambiguously non-Asian or something, or different Asian than you are. How do you feel like you maneuver?
For myself, like how do I identify myself?
Yeah, how do you feel?
Yes, this is a really interesting question, because yesterday evening, actually, I had somebody ask me this question.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it was a person of East Indian descent, and I have had East Indian people ask me. She was very polite about it, and she was just like, "Oh, I don't want to be rude. I'm just curious. Like, are you Black?" Because I do get that. Are you Black? You maybe can be Black, but I'm not sure. So I feel like now, with my experiences, I'm getting those questions more and more. Maybe it's because I'm more on the western part of the United States. I don't think I look that different. I really think it depends on the environment. But after like thinking about that, several months ago when I first moved here into the western part of the United States, I went to a Thai antique shop, and the woman was Thai, and she was like, "Where are you from? You look Asian." Oh. What part of Asia, So I get both. So I feel like it's been more validating for me if I could go back to when I was growing up, I wouldn't think I couldn't dream of having any of those experiences with people asking me these types of questions at all.
Really?
Yeah, because I mean, like, I felt like my parents told me, oh yeah, people would just identify us as, oh, those are those mixed kids. But I felt like no one ever actually told me, oh, you're mixed. Like I just always felt like I was non-white.
That's interesting, because to me, like when I look at you, I see a Black Asian. Like I don't necessarily know just from looking at you what kind of Asian. I think whenever we get mixed, it gets really hard to tell us apart, in the way that monoracial, it's easier to tell the monoracial Asians apart. But I see someone who shows me both a Black woman and an Asian woman. Like I see it when I see your face. And just side note, your skin is fucking flawless. I just wanted to say that, like you're like, you look so good right now with those cheekbones and everything. But that's besides the point. Yeah, so like I'm surprised, I guess, because I grew up on the West Coast. I'm used to people thinking I'm at least Filipino because there's something about me that kind of says I'm Asian, but definitely not, like Japanese, Chinese, Korean, like, but I definitely see it. So it's interesting that you would go through the East Coast and I guess I didn't know that the East Coast wasn't really a place where they would kind of ask that thing. So we've talked before a little bit about your Chinese heritage and, but that you still sort of kind of had to identify more Black because that's how you were kind of more received. Now that you're on the West Coast, are you feeling Asian sometimes?
Well, like I think so, because like I told you with the experience with the Thai lady, I was getting that even when I studied abroad in Singapore, and everyone just thought I was Malaysian, and that was really interesting. Right. I had my hair straightened though at that time.
But you are a darker skinned Asian. Like you look, yeah. So like I can see if you're in Asia that they would just receive you as Asian, and they would just think you are one of the darker skinned, fill in the blank country type of thing.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
It's just interesting experience. And I think, well, like on the East Coast, people will just assume more, like they'll just speak to me in Spanish, or they'll say, oh, you speak Spanish. Or if they learn my name, then they'll say, like, is it Penelope? Like, the Spanish.
Oh, they're trying to say with an accent, yeah.
So I feel like people kind of will ask questions to try to figure out, but they're not actually asking directly because they don't want to come across as rude.
I see. And how do you feel about the direct question, the what are you question?
I'm taken aback because I don't get it asked too often. So I feel like people would just ask the roundabout way, more so to me. And I feel like the times that people have asked me, it's been more out of curiosity, and then it strikes the conversation. And I haven't had people say, what are you? Like maybe very few times in an angry way. I think for me, people kind of say, oh, she's part Black. That's enough for me. She's I don't need to know anything else. I think that's how I kind of think that's why people don't really ask too much.
So what about the difference between being a Black American and being a Trini American?
So my father, it's interesting because he didn't grow up Baptist or anything like that. And I feel like that's a very Black American identification. And so like a lot of the things that I saw with my dad and his siblings, that it wasn't something that I could connect with Black American culture. So they like a lot of Bollywood movies, and because there's a lot of Indian people in Trinidad.
Right. Oh, actually, I was going to ask you if you get coded as South Asian too sometime, Indian.
Yeah,
if ever.
I have been told that before, which is interesting too. One of my aunts, who I saw a picture of her, she showed me a picture of her when she was like really young. And I looked like her when I was that age. So that's kind of crazy. But she's coded as Indian, actually.
Oh,
like
really?
Indian people go up to her and they're like, "Oh, sister," and they get all happy.
Oh, really? So funny.
And she's like, "Actually, I'm not. I am from Trinidad, and I know there's a lot of Indian people there, but I'm not East Indian." It's kind of funny.
That's funny.
But so like they like a lot of Indian movies and they eat Indian food because Trini food, like roti and stuff like that, and they're very laid back. And my dad's family, they were raised Catholic. He went to Catholic school.
Oh, okay.
And he told me that in Trinidad, the two big churches were the Anglican Church and the Catholic Church. So in certain ways, I feel like I could understand like working class Catholic people in some ways because of that exposure that I had with my dad. And he used to give me these weird quizzes. Like he'd say Psalm 23 now. You need to learn these Psalms. You need to yeah. And he used to always say like Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. And I was like, oh, that must be a Trinity thing. But then like my mother-in-law, I heard her say that, and I was like, whoa. So then, because my husband's family is Catholic, so I saw a lot of connections there. So I feel like when I meet other people, I'm like, I see all these connections, but I don't see it so much from the Black American perspective.
Okay.
And then even like the Commonwealth thing with India was a British colony. And I feel like that there are similarities with India and Trinidad. So yeah, and then there's also my father, interestingly enough, when he mentioned to me fairly recently that when he first came to this country, people would go up to him asking him what he was. So that was very interesting. He just said that people would come up to him. They say, "Where are you from? What are you? I don't understand why you talk that way."
Or from the accent?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the accent. But also, he looks very Dominican.
Okay.
People come up to him all the time and they just start speaking in Spanish. And then it's just like, okay, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, at this point, I feel like almost all mixed people just need to learn Spanish because they really think no matter what we are, we're all Spanish. we're all Dominican.
Yeah. And then my mother, she's asked by other Asians, even by other Chinese people, what she is. Which
and
is
she's full Chinese, but she was born here, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
But she said that her father was adopted and he's actually like Mongolian descent. I don't know how that happened. So, but I mean, I have seen Southern Chinese people that look like her, but a lot of people assume she's Filipino.
Okay. Did you grow up as a kid? Did you grow up visiting China and visiting Trinidad?
I never visited Trinidad. I wanted to visit Trinidad when I was a kid. When my grandfather died there, my dad didn't bring us. My mom was very upset. She was just like, "Oh, I wish that he could have brought you so you could see." And now it's kind of dangerous there. So I'm just like, I think it's kind of out of the picture. I would like to visit for the carnival because they're like world renowned for their carnival. For China, I was supposed to go to China initially when I was 6 years old. Because I had to go to Chinese language school, and my first year was Cantonese, and then after that, my mom was like, "Okay, I think Mandarin would be more practical," so she had us do Mandarin after that. And my Chinese teacher felt like I had a lot of natural ability, and so she wanted to bring me to China, but then my father didn't want that. I looked really Chinese. I lost my picture. I'd have to go and ask my mom for it. But there's one picture when I was 6 years old. I looked very, very Chinese. I brought it to show my students when I was a teacher. And they were like, "You look Chinese." Like I looked very, very Chinese. It's pretty crazy. But our facial features change and stuff. And then as I got older, I always liked Chinese language. I felt like that was my way of connecting, and we had to go to Chinatown in New York City. And I'd always hear Cantonese, and I always saw they had they were playing their Cantonese music in the restaurants. And in a lot of ways, I feel more comfortable with Cantonese culture. We'd go do yum cha, which is basically like you have tea, you have dim sum. Dim sum is just like appetizers. Mm-hmm. You have that in the afternoon, you get together. Many times Chinese Americans do that on the weekends too. So you go into Chinatown, go to the grocery store, do yum cha. And that was just the way of connecting. I eventually ended up going to China when I was 17. I went as a study abroad student, and I ended up getting there later than what I was supposed to. And I was there were 4 of us all together. 3 of the exchange students were in southern China. I believe they were all in Guangdong province, and I was the only one up in northern part of China in Shanghai.
Oh, so you didn't even get to necessarily connect with your direct part of China's culture?
Right, I didn't. I went, I know that I met the 3 other exchange students. They were all German, but I didn't meet them in Guangdong province. Yeah, so I was like really disappointed because if I had my pick, then I could have gone to Guangdong province, which is the province where my family is from. And it would have been much more natural for me because I'd already had known the customs more.
Right,
so.
Right.
So that was disappointing. But I did learn a lot about the education system there. And I feel like a lot of people don't understand how behind education in the States is. It's just really, really, really not good. I felt like the education in China was a lot more methodical. Building things, you're just building on very excellent basics. When you go to you could go to what would you call it? Like a store where they just sell office supplies, and you would see books, little mini books. They called them handbooks. I think that's what you would say in English, but they provided a lot of extra help. There's a lot of supplementary materials to help with education there. We had morning exercises, and you'd be at the school for like 12 hours. It was
really?
Yeah, it was intense. It was insane.
I was like, geez.
You would finish, I guess, at like 3 or 4 o'clock, but then you'd stay extra to just study. You could ask questions to the teacher.
Oh, okay.
You could go there early. I'm pretty sure the morning exercises started around 8 in the morning. In my school that I went to was an all-girls school. It was very traditional. We had to walk up to the gate, bow. There would be teachers lined up, and you'd have to just like say in Chinese, good morning, teacher, and then keep walking. Anytime you see a teacher, you have to acknowledge them and say hi. It's like part of the Confucian culture. Mm-hmm. Every time we'd start a class, we'd have to all stand up and we'd have to bow to the teacher and say, 老师好. And then we'd have to sit down and the teacher would say, like students, hello or whatever. And then at the end, you'd say goodbye to the teacher, and then the teacher would bow back. This was a very, very traditional school, though. You probably see that more so in Taiwan. When I was studying Chinese in the States and we had the Chinese books, they actually showed that in the Chinese books. So it was just like so surreal to actually do that when I ended up going there. Yeah, so it was kind of cool.
Despite you not being in your area, in the area that your family originated from, did you still feel like you got to connect and feel Chinese sometimes? How aware of your mixedness were you when you were in China?
I feel like, so I felt very aware of it, and I felt like my mother, she always kind of tried to stifle my mixedness. And now that I know more stuff, like, I feel like my mom's family didn't really, I don't want to say everything because this is being recorded. I could tell you, like,
sure.
yeah, but it was just, there's certain things in the culture that are not talked about, and it's more so by action, and then you know how you're being perceived. And there was like kind of a message that it wasn't welcomed. My father wasn't very welcomed in the family.
Yeah.
So I felt like after experiencing there, I have a sense of, especially reflecting back, when I was actually there, I was like, what's going on? Why can't I be my own person? But it's more like your existence is connected to other people. You don't just exist. It's very hard for me to articulate it, but
no, I think that makes sense.
Yeah,
it's about the greater community versus the individual experience.
Yeah, it's more other focused than self focused. So whatever I do, I also have to think about how does this affect everybody else.
Mm-hmm. And I think that crosses all Asians, because we got that too in the Japanese side. Yeah.
And that's a way of keeping people in line, to just kind of, I think like in Western interpretation, it's like, why does everybody have to be the same? But when I was there, it was kind of like, well, this is a good way for us to all identify, and this is what we do. And it's kind of like that nationalistic pride that a lot of Chinese people have. And I was reading more about Chinese American culture and the Chinese that came from China here in the 1800s and 1900s. And I saw that in that too. And when I read that, I was like, oh, it's like makes more sense. But the face culture, that's inescapable. You can't escape it if you're in China. And I've always felt a certain way because that really kind of messed up my self-esteem, my self-worth.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of like that. There's that Japanese saying, like, if you're the nail up, you have to be hammered down kind of thing. And so there's this conflict where if you're mixed with Chinese and if you're mixed where you're darker complexion, especially in the North, because there's a thing like if you watch Hong Kong TV, the dramas, people are like my complexion. But if you watch Northern Chinese TV, the people are very pale. I don't know if they put skin whitener on. So I think that there was also that dynamic. Right. And feeling that I'm never enough, I'll never measure up. You're in a no-win situation because image is so important.
Right. Do you have a version of that with the Trini side? Like, are you ever around other Trini people so that you get a sense of whether or not you would be welcome?
I have been around other Trini people that weren't my family. There was I had a good friend who was Trini, and he introduced me to his sister. And he's like, "Oh, you look like just like people from my family." So that was validating. But he never really validated the fact that I was like, I had a Chinese parent. Right. I think that's the distinction there. So, yeah, we're all mixed, but you don't really have a Chinese parent. I have a Chinese grandmother, so we're the same. That's how he was seeing it. But I have had other Trini people. I think he's the only Trini person actually that said that to me. All the other Trini people validated me and said, "Oh yeah, you have a Chinese parent." I could tell right away after meeting me. So he's the outlier. Oh, I've always felt welcomed. I never felt like they were judging me. They never said, "Oh, you're not Trini enough." It wasn't anything like that. It was just like the national identity of Trinidadians is everybody's Trini. That's how I see it.
I feel like almost every other country but the United States is that way. Like, you are the nation. Japanese, you are Japanese. France, England, even where there are white people, you are the country. Here, our version of that is to be American, you have to be this particular type of American. And if you don't fit that mold, then where are you from? No, where are you really from? That kind of stuff, which is so toxic in terms of like trying to get us to feel like, how are we a foreigner in our own home? We're generationally from here. I think we all struggle with that. So you talked about, and we've talked about this several times in our group and offline and everything like that, about how, well, I guess, we all talk about this as a community. As mixed people, our self-esteem does seem to be impacted by whether or not we are received by other people and whether or not we're welcomed. And there are ways in which I know in my case, if I'm welcomed by Black folks and embraced as a Black person, I don't necessarily feel erased in terms of my Japaneseness or my half white. I never feel erased if no one acknowledges that I'm part white. Like, that's fine. I don't need it. But I do sometimes need to be validated in my Japaneseness, and I do sometimes need to be validated in my Blackness. So if Black people just accept me as Black, totally fine. I've never been accepted by Japanese folks as a Japanese person. I've been accepted as an American, which is weird because in America, I might not necessarily be accepted as an American, but if in a Japanese environment, I am accepted as an American. It's so I don't have the same experience between one side or the other. In your case, you're embraced as a Trini with Trini folks. With Chinese, you're acknowledged as other?
Yeah, so I feel like it depends on the Chinese person.
Yeah, sure.
And it depends on where in China. So
okay.
I visited China multiple times, and when I was in southern China, people were addressing me in Cantonese, and they were saying sister. When I was in northern China, there were people that were addressing me in that kinship term. But then again, when I was in southern China, that was when my hair was straightened. When I was in northern China, people would address me with the kinship term if my hair is covered. And I've had that in Chinatown too. Oh. So my hair is very much an indicator. I've asked white people, I'm like, how do you know I'm Black? And then they say right away, they always say my hair.
Right.
That's the thing that really sticks out.
It does stick out. You have a lot of it, and it's pretty obvious. The texture that is, not like Chinese texture or whatever, if they're coding you more Chinese than Black. But it's really interesting. And I haven't dealt, every time I try to get more into my Asianness, something blocks me. And
me too.
I just feel like it's safer in the Black side. Like, it's just safer in the Black side. And I have to go sit where I'm most comfortable. And even me who tries to explore all aspects and love my mixed ass self, if I'm confronted by a sea of Japanese faces, I'm just like, I am not like you. I just don't feel enough like them. And I want to sometimes. I definitely want to. I know that there's aspects of the culture that speaks very heavily to me. But there's just something in particular about Asianness. And I think it crosses, it's not just a Japanese thing. I think it definitely crosses where there is this block when we're not like everybody else. Like, those countries are so homogenous in a way that even as they are now experiencing more immigration from other places, they still manage to maintain. I mean, look at Chinese. You go to America, you could go to any American city and there is a gate, there is a Chinatown, there is a place where Chinese can be Chinese and almost not speak English if they don't have to. They can live their entire, all their commerce can be, Chinese and everything like that. And no other culture really has that as hardcore as the Chinese do. So it's so weird. Like, how do you penetrate it? Like, how do you penetrate it enough as a mixed Chinese to feel like you just get to be Chinese today if you wanted to?
Yeah. I think the first thing would be to master the language. So I could speak Chinese. I went to a Chinese restaurant a few weeks ago to get takeout, and I used the Chinese term, and the guy didn't really look surprised, but when he was asking me for things, he's like, do you want chopsticks? There's very subtle things. So,
right.
I remember when I'd go to Chinatown, they'd always give me and my older brother forks, and my dad a fork, and then my younger brother, who looks much more Asian, and my mother would get chopsticks. So there's these very small things, these very small nuances.
There's some shade. There's some Asian shade, because Japanese do that too.
It's I never part of it could be that they're just trying to accommodate. So if they see somebody who their face is not very Asian, so then they'll try to speak in English. You know, I used to feel very offended, but then when I started framing it that way, then it kind of helped me more.
Right.
And I was okay, positive. Well, I'm not fully Asian and I don't look fully Asian, and that's okay. And I'm coming into their space, and they're very much in-group, out-group membership. When I speak Chinese, they kind of just, light up. They really respect somebody who, especially because my mom was born here, and then I know Chinese, I could read it, I could write it, I could speak it. They a lot of times they're like, oh, they like are like my biggest cheerleader after that. They're like, yo, man, I'll help you.
That's sweet.
Yeah. So in that way, I feel like a very strong connection. And I've also noticed too, is that a lot of times they will think that my father is Chinese because I speak Chinese. And then I've been told that a lot of times the Chinese mothers drop the ball in terms of teaching their children the Chinese language.
Oh, really?
I mean, like that. Yeah. So I've been to places where I'm getting something and I'm speaking to the cashier in Chinese. And then like, I remember distinctly this particular moment. And then the guy was looking for my surname. Like he was just like, why? Like, is your father the Chinese one kind of thing? Because it's a very patrilineal culture. They have those, right. Each clan, each surname group you can go to. And like if it's Lee or something like that, if that's your last name, you can go to the Lee Association, and they have them in Chinatown. And part of me too has always had to grapple with that sense of loss and grief. It's very hard for me because I feel like in a lot of ways, I have had a Chinese American experience, and a lot of Chinese people and Asian people would tell me that I have certain mannerisms that are very Asian. And I even knew this girl, she was from Taiwan, and everyone would always say that we have similar personalities. And then I started thinking, yeah, we do kind of have similar personalities.
Funny.
Just so funny. But so like in a lot of ways, there's that sense of loss where it's like you feel so comfortable, but then at the same time, it's like, I feel like I personally, like you said, that if Black people fully accept you and embrace you and acknowledge your existence, right, then you don't feel any erasure. But I always would feel like a sense of erasure when Chinese people would embrace me.
Oh.
When I was in France, a lot of the other international students were Chinese, when we speak in Chinese and stuff like that. And they started, like, they expected all these things of me because I knew the language. They're like, every Chinese woman knows these things. And I was kind of feeling like
sentences like that,
getting frustrated with myself, because it's like, now you're putting so much expectations on me and I'm getting all this pressure, although the pressure, I'm allowing it to get to me, right? I take some of the, but it's difficult because I always feel like either some people think I'm just a complete foreigner. Like one point and when I was in China, I was talking to somebody in Chinese, and then they asked, oh, how do you speak Chinese? I said, oh, my mother's Chinese. And then this like random other Chinese guy walks by and he was like, she's not Chinese. Her mother's not Chinese. Like in English, though. It was very bizarre.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
It was like, what the heck? And then the person I was talking to was like, do you know that person? Like, because they were saying
right?
it so like
Matter
declaring that it was a fact.
Wow.
And I was like, I have no idea who that is.
That's so wild.
Yeah, so I've had these experiences that were all across the board. When I was in Singapore, besides Malaysians, some people thought I was Hakka, which is a type of Chinese ethnicity. Mm-hmm. They're very much like, some people call them the Jews of China. So they go and they migrate to different places, different countries. Okay. And then they open businesses. Okay. And my mother's surname actually is a Hakka surname. So I've had people ask, oh, are you Hakka? I don't think I am. I had somebody speaking to me in Hakka. I just responded back in Mandarin. I understood it. But it's just these types of things. I could understand how Chinese people feel because I've had some of their experiences.
Right. It's interesting. So you said that bit about that loss and the grief that comes along with the loss of like not being able to embrace, especially not having a surname that comes from a specific place. And I think cultures really mess us up because we can come from cultures that do this differently, right? Like you can come from a culture where you get to claim the ethnicity if you are if your father is or if your mother is. I mean, even here in the United States, as being a Black person, it used to be through the mother because they didn't want the children of slave owners to be able to claim whiteness. So they said you had, if your, mother was Black, you were Black, basically. And then over time, that just became the one drop rule. If you got one drop of Black, you're Black. Whereas like, for Jewish people, it's if your mother is Jewish, you get to be Jewish. For Nigerians, it's if your father is, and Jamaicans, I think it's if your mother is. Like all across the world, we claim it based off of a different parentage. And well, fuck, what if you're mixed with people who claim it across the board and you just don't get to own it? Like, how do I get to claim all this? And what you said that really hit me was the grief, because I do think that is a very real thing where you're just, especially as a mixed person, it's almost like mourning the loss, not necessarily mono-ethnicity, but like full ownership of something. And because we're mixed with so many different things, we feel like we don't have permission to own it in so much that we would want to. And I'm trying to break that. I mean, even through this show, as I've come to start saying the be your mixed ass self, like even for me, I still have to work on that, where I was just like, no, this is part of me. I get to claim this regardless of what other people says. But then, that idea of, well, who are you to claim it as a mixed person? And so I feel like the responsibility to the mixed community is to at least provide a space where we're not erasing each other, whatever we are. And at least we have one place we can go where we don't experience that. How do you deal with the grief? How do you work through it for you?
Yeah, this is a great question. So I feel like a lot of it, I had to just accept things as they are and feel comfort in that discomfort.
Okay.
I feel like, my mother, since she was born in the States, she had a lot of grief for herself because a lot of Chinese, they came to the States, but they wanted to go back to China. And my grandfather had that grief. My grandmother had that grief. And
so the idea being that you're coming here maybe just to earn some money for a period of time and then go back? Okay.
Yeah, it was like temporary. So, because they love China so much and the people there and everything about it means it's so close to their heart. And they have to be in a new land because when my grandparents left, it was awful. There was the war. They saw people dying. My grandfather actually knew Japanese because of the occupation of the Japanese in China.
Yeah.
And he actually was like one of the translators in World War II. But there is that grief. And then when you come to the United States, you want your children to love China. You want them to be proud of who they are and their ancestry and everything about the culture. And when you see your children struggling and you can't do anything about it, I mean, like they were bullied every day. The people in the neighborhood would deface their property. They had a laundry business and people would write, chinks, go home, stuff like this, graffiti. Yeah. They'd leave dead animals on their doorstep, awful things.
Goodness.
And, it's just the story of my grandparents, I think, was so heartbreaking, even for my aunts and uncle. It was so heartbreaking for me. So I feel like, for my mom, I think that part of it is that she wishes that she didn't want to assimilate so much because her parents would speak to her in Toisanese and then she would just speak back in English because you start to think you're bad. There's something wrong with you if people are constantly kicking the back of your chair and bullying you. Right. And you're the only person in the town that looks like you besides your siblings. So there's that grief. My grief is different. My grief is that, I'm not wholly only Chinese. And I feel like I've had a lot of experiences that were very Chinese, but then how can a person communicate that? It's kind of like, okay, Black American people, they'll see another Black person, they say brother or sister, they'll do the head nod. There's that acknowledgement. It's that lack of acknowledgement when you know so much about the culture and you have this intimate understanding of the culture. Now, I'm not saying I have a fully intimate understanding like somebody that was born and raised in China, but I'm saying that I do feel like I should give myself enough credit that I do have somewhat of a Chinese American experience.
Sure.
And it's kind of like seeing everybody with their families and you so want to partake in those traditions and those customs, but you'll be left out. Like even when I was in France with the Chinese people there, they wouldn't invite me to the Chinese New Year. And then my classmates were like, why aren't they inviting you? I'm like, I have no idea. So there's always that thin veil of, well, we respect you, but there's never going to be enough for you to be enough. And then that's where that stems those feelings of inadequacy.
Right.
And then coming to terms with, well, it's completely outside of my control. I worked so hard to try to prove, even to the Black American community, I started feeling guilt. Like I think a lot of times they would kind of guilt me. They would say, oh, you're lighter complexion, so you need to help the community, or you lived in the suburbs, come back and help the community. And I try to do that.
Use
really sick.
Yeah.
It was bad.
And that's a heavy responsibility for others to put on us. I think if we do it to ourselves, that's one thing. I still think it's a heavy responsibility if we do it to ourselves. But when it comes from the outside of us, that's a heavy burden, because it's like we were just born. We could have been born looking any kind of way. Like you and I have both sent each other pictures of our brothers, and we see like how different we look from our brothers, that we don't even look like we're necessarily the same ethnic groups. But we're full siblings, and the roll of the genetic dice is so random. We could be anything, and really it is just about what culture we either had access to or what culture we attach to more. Based off of that alone, my brother and I come from totally different groups, even though we grew up in the same household with the same people and the same ethnic mixes. I am Black, and he chose a different path. Like, I'm not trying to tell his story because that's his story to tell, but like, I'm Black. He's not. We're siblings, full ass siblings. So it's just, oh gosh, it's like, it pains me to think that there's so much outside of our control as mixed people in terms of how we're seen, how we're accepted, and what responsibilities are put on us as mixed people. I do it to myself too. I mean, I've even been on a TV show saying it's our responsibility as lighter skinned, mixed Black folks to, be aware of the effect we have in a room of monoracial Black people. I do believe that. And yet at the same time, I don't want to have to feel that way. I don't want to have to be like, I'm sorry that my ancestry is such that it's obvious and it reminds you of slavery. And it's, things like that. Like, I hate that I feel that way. And yet it's because of the way I'm treated throughout a lot of the spaces that I end up feeling that way and feel like preemptively apologetic. Even as when I'm with my mixed folks, I'm like preaching the word of unapologetic mixedness and stuff like that. And every now and then it hits me and it really messes me up, especially the more that I do militantly mixed, the more it messes me up when I feel apologetic, because I'm just like, I can't tell everybody to be their mixed ass selves and then have this moment of like, am I Black enough for this space? But it's a constant, and it's so easy for one person's comment to knock us off our path. Like, I think the idea of that guy walking past you that wasn't even involved in the conversation to just insert, like, that could have wrecked me. Like, how hurtful that must have been. And fucking how dare him too. That's the other part. How dare him?
A lot of entitlement there.
Right? Like, and that's the other part about like monoracialness versus mixedness is that, what makes us have less access? Like in terms of ingredients, you need a whole bunch of things to make a meal, to make a thing. We are kind of a version of that, right? We are a bunch of different ethnicities that have made who we are. So everything is flavoring our experience. Everything is informing the person that we are walking around being. So why do I have less access? Why do you have less access? Why can't you claim it? as much as the next person? Why can't I claim it as much as the next person? Fucking sucks, and it's hard.
Yeah.
It's so hard.
I wasn't, I've had that experience happen. And then I also had another experience happen too that's similar. Both experiences, I was unperturbed, surprisingly. The first one with the guy that just said that stuff in China, I was kind of just like, oh, okay, that's his feelings, that's his opinion. But at the end of the day, I can take a DNA test. Us mixed people, we have mixed bone marrow. We have that's the truth, right? And I think a lot of times people want to say something and they feel like that is the truth, but it isn't the truth. Another time, this is really, I think like, what's it called? Serendipity. So maybe it's like, some sort of, it was just so random. So when I was in Singapore, this Chinese guy, I met him through other people I knew. And then I was speaking Chinese, and then he was just like, oh, you speak Chinese very well, but you can't possibly be Chinese. He tells me that. But I was like so calm about it. I was just like, okay, yeah, whatever. Because I was in this space where I was like, whatever I said, he's not going to listen anyway. He already made up his mind. Right. So in that way, I just had some peace of mind. Chance happens. My mom comes to visit me in Singapore. We're on the train. This same exact guy comes, he sees me. I don't say anything. I'm all like, okay, whatever. My mom he sits next to us, and my mom's like, hi, I'm Penelope's mother. Who are you? He was so shocked. It was hilarious.
That moment feels sweet to me. Just like,
yeah, man. So,
yes.
I guess the other thing too, like to deal with the grief, is I do a lot of meditating, letting go, accepting. I go to a local sangha. We meet through Zoom, and we talk about like very abstract things. Like there really is no self. You could only find the things that are not yourself. And even affiliations, like things are always changing. People use different groups to, I guess, identify with. But, we talk about in the group that identification can cause suffering too, which is very interesting, clinging to certain identifications. And then the thing about it is that as a mixed person, it's difficult because if you're clinging to a certain identity, when you go to another country, like for example, when I was in France, I was considered mixed. Right. That really affected my identity because I felt like, okay, now I don't have to be anything. I could just be myself. Yeah. I don't have to prove my Chinese or my Trini or if people are imposing the Black American side or whatever, I could just be myself. And it was very freeing. And at that moment though, I also, like at the time I knew about colorism, but I never felt that I benefited from it. And like I told you, there were all these other international students and I never was carded. All the other international students were carded by like the officials. They would ask everybody for their immigration papers.
Oh, you weren't carded as a foreigner.
I was never carded as a foreigner, ever.
Oh, interesting.
There was a lot of racism towards foreigners, never carded. And it was like months. I'm like, I'm waiting. They're going to get me. They never did.
They're going to get me.
It was kind of funny. Yeah. And I feel like, that was part of the advantage of being mixed. So there are advantages and disadvantages to anything. Yeah. People just thought, oh, I just thought you were French. I just thought you had a French parent. Whatever that means. I'm assuming maybe that means they think I have a white French parent. But again, you mentioned before the French national identity, it's more like what the Americans would want to strive for. Like you could be French, you could be Black, you could be Vietnamese, you could be, whatever.
It doesn't mean that they don't have racism, but it does mean that at least even as you are a person of different colors, they will still understand you as a French person.
Right. They're not going.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're not going around saying you're not French. You're from some other place, even though the people were there for generations. Like it's not like that. There is a lot of racism there. I saw, African French people that were fluent in English and, they have their PhDs and they can't get jobs because a lot of times, at least at that time when I was there, your CV, your resume you have to put a picture most of the time and they scan through it, and they're just, if they see your name as a certain type of depicting a certain ethnicity, just like here, they're kind of like, toss. I had an interview, and once the guy saw me, I was like, I didn't get it. I didn't get the job because, and the other thing too was, I was going to lounges and stuff to just hang out and dance with my friends. And there were African people that I knew, and they were not allowed in. I didn't know that until they told me that. Yeah. So that's what I mean by I didn't know how I benefited. And people here would always say, you benefit, like people will not bother you. Like I don't get pulled over by the police. I don't get that type of stuff. Right. I still have been called N-word or whatever. But yeah, so those things have opened my eyes. The last thing about the grief to help me too was like inner child work. So I've been doing a lot of parenting, creating that parent that I never really had that validated me, because I feel like a lot of times we're kind of put in a situation where we're in an environment and we don't have the resources for people to validate who we truly are, and searching for that authentic self, and then accepting and giving myself permission to be that authentic self, and then not allowing myself to be bogged down by other people's opinions. I think that really helps.
Well, that's awesome. I'm glad that you do work like that. I haven't really thought about, even in therapy, I haven't really thought about tackling the issues that I have necessarily with the kind of non-parents that I had. I mean, I have addressed a lot of things, but I still harbor a lot of resentment where that's concerned. So I haven't worked it all the way through, but I'm glad that you're doing that kind of work. We are getting to the end, so it's time to answer that question that I ask everybody with everything that we go through as mixed people, and that's that time of sometimes not even accepting ourselves. I want to make sure that we do always try to find that spot here on the show. So what is it that you do love most about being a mixed person?
I just like how it has allowed me to see different perspectives. Mm-hmm. It really has pushed me to understand why the world works the way it does. It's pushed my curiosity. It's pushed me to learn more about different cultures and histories. And I think also it's helped me to kind of not see things in such a confined way. I think we could all learn things from each other. Mm-hmm. I think before I was very much into this rigid thinking, like, oh, this is a certain path, you need to do certain steps, and that's how it should be. Mm. And now I feel like the world is just endless opportunities of learning and understanding. And just also understanding that things are outside of our control and it's okay. That has really helped me the most about being mixed, was that there's so many things outside of our control.
Right. That's a good lesson to take away. We can't control how people see us. We can't control how they code us. We can't control what stereotypes that they're putting on us. And I guess that's also part of being our mixed ass selves. It's just like, don't let it affect, if we can, not let it affect us, and just allow us to kind of control our own perspective and things. So that's amazing. Thank you so much for coming back and doing this with me. I really love this conversation. I think we got more into the stuff that we didn't get to last time. So it was great. I am sad that we lost what we had, but I do feel like I think we did a good job today.
I think so too.
And getting it back. I really want you to know how much I value you. I mean, I think it hasn't been like maybe quite a whole year. Maybe it's been more like 8 or months or so that since you and I have been kind of in interacting, but I really appreciate you. I appreciate your perspective. I think you're really empathetic and thoughtful in a way that, even within our mixed group and our mixed communities, sometimes we don't offer empathy to each other, and where, we can be really rigid. Like you said, sometimes we're affected by the rigidity around us. And so some of us remain that way, but I feel it from you when I talk to you or when I hear you on the group chats, and I just really do value you. So I appreciate that you've stayed with me through this and that you continue to come back and everything. So thank you so much for being who you are.
Thank you. Thank you for being who you are too.
Thank you. Militantly Mixed is a Main Hustle Media podcast, produced and hosted by me, Charmaine Fury. Music is by David Bogan the One. You can follow us on social media on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Militantly Mixed. If you'd like to become a sponsor of Militantly Mixed, please go to patreon.com/militantlymixed for monthly sponsorship or paypal.me/militantlymixed for a one-time only donation. And if you like what you hear on Militantly Mixed, please subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to be your mixed-ass self.
Main Hustle Media. Turn your side hustle into your main hustle.